Mescaline is a phenethylamine alkaloid found in various species of cacti, the most well-known being peyote, Lophophora williamsi, and San Pedro. Mescaline has effects comparable to those of LSD and psilocybin, albeit with a greater emphasis on colors and patterns. So here we are talking about psychedelic sex. And if what comes to your mind is a group of unkempt people sitting around listening to the Grateful Dead, the most boring rock group in the entire world, the sure turnoff of all music I've ever been exposed to involuntarily, or Ravi Shankar, with those ragas and all those sorts of things, plunk, 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 plunk. Yes, they get you into a state, all right. I don't know what that state is. Maybe New Jersey, someplace you never want to go. Psychedelic sex. Oh, my God. That sounds really hideous if you think about the associations of psychedelics and sex. Let's pause for a moment and just say that if you are in an intimate situation with someone you are really not attracted to at all, someone who's truly hideous, or who's just not attractive, who's plain and plump, and their body isn't sexual, their appearance isn't sexual, there's no possibility that you will ever fall in love with them. Well, being in that situation under the influence of a psychedelic substance ain't gonna help things. Okay? And also, to be very, very frank, let's take an example. If a man is seriously under-endowed, and he is with a woman and attempts penetration sex, very popular form of sex I've heard about in my life. People keep talking about it, so it must be a popular form of sex. Well, this unendowed person is not going to be able to give the woman a deep vaginal orgasm, which is the goal, the real goal of sexual activity. I refer you back to our bonus episode, Size Does Matter. It's all about evolution, which is a promo on excerpt from our longer episode, Feminine Sensuality. By the way, we've also done Size Does Matter on our TikTok. Let's go back then to talking about psychedelic sex between attractive people. That's the kind of psychedelic sex that you guys want to have, whether it's under the influence of substances or not. But hold on just a minute. Hold on a little bit. You think about the reasons that people gave at the very beginning of this episode, What's Her Name and Bus, published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, and they gave some reasons for why people have sex, and one of them was to get closer to God. Back to that in a moment. And another was the altruistic reason to make the other person feel good about themselves, because otherwise they'll feel like bleep if I don't have sex with them. Jeepers. That sounds kind of hideous. Although if you're a really nice person, that's maybe the sort of thing that you go around doing. And do you really have psychedelic sex like that? Do you really have that really hot sex? You know what I'm talking about? I don't have to explain it to you. Anybody who's had that really hot sex knows exactly what I'm talking about. You don't need the Explore Ecstatic Sensuality podcast to tell you what that is. Just think about it in your memories and then plan for it in your future, man. When you see a gorgeous person of the opposite sex, man, and by man I'm encompassing males and females, then just go for it. They want it too, I bet. Well, yeah, make sure that they want it before you do anything. But that stuff about I want to have sex in order to get closer to God. So let's think about what that might mean. In Armenian mythology, you have Ashtigach, goddess of fertility and love. In Aztec mythology, you have Huachinquetzal, goddess of fertility, beauty, and female sexual power. In Canaanite mythology, you have Astarte, a good one, goddess of sexual love, fertility, and warfare. And you also have Quetzal, goddess of love, beauty, and sex. In Chinese mythology, you have Yang Lao, a Chinese god of love who binds two people together with an invisible red string. A little bit of, bondage and discipline. In Egyptian mythology, it gets pretty good. Bes, goddess of music, dance, and sexual pleasure. I read ancient Egyptian and studied all that stuff in every phase of the language, and I can speak it and write it and all that sort of stuff. So I know all these deities. They're boss deities. Bes, goddess of music, dance, and sexual pleasure. Hathor, goddess of the sky, love, beauty, and music. And Bastet, goddess of felines, love, sexuality, protection, beauty, and dance. Hymenaeus, goddess of marriage and marriage feasts. Well, unless you really, really want to do that. I have a rule, by the way, and that is never attend the weddings or marriage rites of women I'm in love with. Unless they're getting married to me, which is very unlikely to happen. You guys, I'm sure, have all seen that Julia Roberts movie. And talk about Julia Roberts for a second. I was having lunch. Actually, he took me, really did, with Julia Roberts' attorney, Barry Hirsch, of Armstrong, Hayem, Hirsch, blah, 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 those guys, at Jimmy's restaurant in Century City, which was Ronald Reagan's favorite restaurant. And we were having a nice chat about this and that, and out of the blue, he turns out he represented both myself and Julia Roberts. Got to emphasize that. So he asked me, how would you like to be in the Julia Roberts business? Right off the top of his head. And I said, well, yeah, sure. That's I love Julia Roberts from day one. I thought she was really fantastic. Movies like Sleeping with the Enemy. Even from the very beginning, she was absolutely incredible. So I said, yeah, sure. What do I got to do to be in the Julia Roberts business? And he said, well, it's really simple. Just pay her $20 million. And I was sitting there, and I must be an idiot, because I had $20 million in my back pocket, and I could have pulled it out and said, Barry Hirsch, here you go. I'm in the Julia Roberts business from this moment on. But one of the biggest mistakes of my life, dudes. One of the biggest mistakes. Although I have made more than one. Trust me. There's this woman I fancy. And how do you fancy a plain woman? That's my little comedy shtick for today. So there's this woman I fancy, and I told her that she looked like Julia Roberts. Man, that didn't go down well with her. And previously I told her that she looks like Sophia Loren, and that didn't go down with her either. I wonder who women want to be compared with nowadays. You really need to let me know this. And if you fail in giving me the right answer, you will go to hell rather than heaven. Okay, so you've got to be right on this one. So anyway, in my best friend's wedding, Julia is upset that this guy she's been in love with for a very long time, who's played by, Dermot Mulroney. And that weird lip of his I find difficult to look at, but I guess it was fine with Julia. And she, does all sorts of stuff to try to stand in the way of Dermot Mulroney getting married to what's-her-name. I thought she'd gone away a long time ago. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. And she tries everything, every kind of shtick, kind of mean and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, she fails in her efforts. So they're at this kind of, one of these kind of wedding parties. And I avoid those like the plague. They are the plague in a certain way. And so there she is at this wedding party, and all of a sudden, this is a little dream kind of thing. For Julia, her boss, who is thoroughly and irreconcilably gay, which is just fine, but he's on the cell phone with her. She doesn't know that he's there, and it ends up that they are standing talking, and they start dancing, and it turns out that he says, well, there may not be marriage, and there may not even be sex, but, we're in love, some kind of shtick like that. And I'm thinking, wow, if I went to the wedding of a woman I'm in love with, which I'm not going to do, ain't going to do it. Never attend weddings of women you're in love with. A very hard and fast rule. So sitting there is her gorgeous lesbian friend. And that gorgeous lesbian friend says to me, well, we may not get married and we may not have sex. And I look at her deeply. I give women this look. And with that look, I say to her, of course we're going to have sex. Come on, you're talking to the sexiest man in the world. Okay, back to our discussion of what were we talking about? Oh yeah, sex with gods. Pothos, god of sexual longing, yearning, and desire. Lithuanian mythology. Any Lithuanians out there? Milda, goddess of love and freedom. Moroccan mythology. Condisa, goddess of lust, who first seduces men, then drives them insane. Been there, done that. Voodoo, Baron Lacroix, who interestingly enough plays a major part in my novels, which are coming up and which you will all want to read, and they're likely to get you just simply too hot. I'm sorry, that's the nature of my novels. So, let's go out there and have psychedelic sex. Let's go out there and have unrestrained sex. If substances play a part in that, by all means. If Tantra plays a part in that, by all means. Whatever you need to do, just do it. And lest we forget, we are talking here about sensuality. We are talking about sex involving the mind, the body, and every part of the mind and the body. When you have sex of this sort, you are feeling your sexuality, your sensuality, your eroticism in every part of your being. And the person you are with is feeling their sensuality, their eroticism, in every part of their body and in every part of their being. It's all happening at once. It is something over which, in a certain way, you have lost control, but not really. The control element, the control aspect, the will, never goes away. The will to improvise. The imagination never goes away. The creativity never, ever goes away during sexuality. The enjoyment of your partner's creativity and will and innovation and imagination during sex never, ever goes away. I think a little bit about jazz. I love jazz, but something about jazz. One thing about jazz is that there is what do they call it? Like in gospel music, there is a statement and a response, going back to a religious church situation and probably going back before that to Africa. And this is something we hear a lot in really great jazz music. You have Ornette making a statement and then Don Cherry coming in with another statement, kind of an example I really like. But then jazz goes to another level in which the two instrumentalists are playing together, playing off each other, with none of them ever being silent, none of them ever waiting for the other. They're playing together. They're making music together. And in doing so, they rise to new heights. They fall back a little bit. They rise to new heights again. This is the kind of sex that we regard as psychedelic sex. And after this type of sex, which may take a while to end, after this type of sex, you will feel with your partner a sense of joy, You have discovered joyous love. Love is so important to sex. Love is so important to life. This is something we all need to think about, which is simply how sex increases love, how sex is a natural response to love, how sex, sensuality are a part of love. You can go through life and have a nice relationship, a nice kind of sweet, tender relationship with someone and never get to this level. It's almost like a platonic type of relationship. It's like companionship relationship. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, previous episodes. Two people together, it's kind of like roommates. Roommates with benefits, but the benefits are not that great. Roommate sex. Not what we're talking about here. We're talking about taking sex, to use a cliche, to an entirely new level, but it's beyond the whole notion of levels. It's beyond the whole notion of trying to get somewhere and then getting somewhere. It's not about effort. I've said elsewhere that life should have an objective and that sort of thing, but if you set an objective to, we're going to have great sex, it may happen, but very likely will not. This is what we mean by psychedelic sex. For just one moment, I promise you, only one, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of today's episode and remind you of some wise statements made by psychotherapist, novelist, writer, relationship counselor Anita De Francesco made about sex and love, about how it is possible to have a relationship with someone and how it is possible to have sex with someone and to love someone without ever, quote-unquote, being in love. Well, I'm never going to differ with or disagree with Anita about anything. But really, 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 truly, sex is the fuel on which love runs. And love is the fuel on which sex runs. They go together all the time. They work together. They help each other. The more you love someone, the better sex you will have. And if you have the kind of sex that I've been talking about just within the last few minutes, then it is very likely that you will go from the point of loving someone to the point of being in love with someone, to the point even of realizing that that person may be, just maybe, your twin flame, and that the two of you will ignite each other in the status of being each other's twin flame. The twin flame of creativity, the twin flame of passion, the twin flame of lust, the twin flame in which each of you ignites as far as you can feel in the universe, in space and time. You are the light, you are the heat, you are the power. You together are the power. You walk around through life and you encounter other people, and you bring energy, you bring force, you bring everything as you travel through. People look at you as a couple. A couple. A couple. In my business, they used to talk about power couples. Well, that's okay, but it's nothing like being with. It's nothing like going through the world, traveling through space and time, traveling through your imagination back and forth in space and time, into eternity, into infinity, with your twin flame. Because I believe that sex promotes an openness in relationships, promotes communication, because the kind of communication you have in bed, the type of full communication, bodily communication, telling the other party what you want, not only by words, but with your bodies, with your eyes, with your sexual organs, with your genitals. And then sometimes, after great sex, you can have great conversations in bed. Ever done that? If you haven't done that, you're missing out on a lot. Great conversations about all kinds of things. You really learn to share by having sex. Let me repeat that. You learn to share by having sex. And if you're sharing about things already, about your ideas, plans, hobbies, whatever that means, activities, dreams, aspirations, then that kind of sharing is going to help you have great sex. And if you have that kind of communication and sharing, and if you truly get the other person and value them and realize their importance, their inner being, their inner drives, their soul, if you like that type of terminology, then just possibly you may realize that that person is not just your soul mate. As Anita explains, we can have many soulmates, but that person may be, in fact, your true flame. Now, let us turn to what, in our opinion, is a groundbreaking article entitled Psychedelics and Connectedness, published in the August 2017 issue of the journal Psychopharmacology. The authors were members of the Psychedelic Research Group, Center for Psychiatry, Department of Medicine, Imperial College, London. April 2017 featured the largest ever conference on the topic of psychedelic science. It was held in Oakland, California, and was attended by 3,000 people from over 40 different countries. Among the 175-plus speakers were Tom Insel, former director of the National Institute for Mental Health, and Paul Zummergrad, past president of the American Psychiatric Association, who spoke enthusiastically and encouragingly about the therapeutic use of psychedelic substances such as psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, ayahuasca, unquote. Here the authors are telling us that DMT, N,N-dimethyltryptamine, is the same as ayahuasca. This is, however, not precisely the case. DMT-containing plants are commonly used in indigenous Amazonian shamanic practices. It is usually one of the main active constituents of the drink ayahuasca. However, ayahuasca is sometimes brewed with plants that do not produce DMT. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic and entheogenic mixed drink brew commonly made out of Banisteriopsis capsivine and the Cicoria viridis shrub or a substitute, and possibly other ingredients. We have been advised that datura is a key ingredient in shamanic ayahuasca. Anthropologists tell us that indigenous groups with a great deal of experience with and detailed knowledge of datura have been known to use datura spiritually, including the Navajo and especially the Havasupai. Adequate knowledge of datura's properties is necessary to facilitate a safe experience. The ancient inhabitants of what became Central and Southern California used to ingest datura to commune with deities through visions. The Southern Paiute believed that datura can help locate missing objects. In ancient Mexico, datura also played an important role in the religion of the Aztecs and the practices of their medicine men and necromancers. It was reportedly used by the Aztecs for ritual sacrifices and malevolent purposes as well. In modern-day Mexico, some datura species are still used for sorcery and other occult practices, mostly in the southern region of Veracruz, specifically in the city of Catemaco. German anthropologist Christian Reich has said, quote, "A mild dosage produces medicinal and healing effects. A moderate dosage produces aphrodisiac effects, and high dosages are used for shamanic purposes." According to the online source netmeds.com, datura offers a one-shot traditional remedy for boosting libido and improving fertility in both men and women. It showcases strong aphrodisiac properties that not only help in reducing mental stress and anxiety, but also stimulate the reproductive hormones for increasing libido. It plays a key role in increasing virility and stamina in men. Consuming purified datura seeds by steeping them in milk has been known to increase blood circulation in the genitals, which thereby improve the production of male hormones like testosterone and luteinizing hormone, thus improving the motility and quality of sperm in the male. Unquote. Then there is Salvia divinorum. Salvia divinorum is a rare species of sage that is native to a remote region of Oaxaca, Mexico, where it has been used for hundreds of years in shamanic healing rituals by the Mazatec Indians. When the leaves of the plant are chewed or smoked, a relatively short-acting psychedelic or visionary experience generally follows. In large enough doses, Salvia divinorum is one of the most powerful psychedelic substances known, similar to ayahuasca in its effects. In smaller doses, however, Salvia divinorum is said to have aphrodisiac effects, to increase sensual awareness, and to dramatically enhance one's tactile sensitivity during sex. Although the Mazatec curanderas cautionally suggest that people abstain from sex for 4 days prior to using Salvia divinorum, the origin of this advice is unknown. We suspect that this belief may have resulted from a Catholic influence on the Indians rather than any actual problem with mixing sex and Salvia divinorum. Most people I've spoken to say that the most effective way to use Salvia divinorum for sex is as a sublingual extract that one holds under one's tongue for 15 minutes. This method ensures that one is getting precisely the dosage that he or she intends, and it lengthens the duration of the experience. Smoking Salvia divinorum generally lasts for only around 15 minutes, while the sublingual Salvia divinorum extracts last closer to an hour. With regard to dosage, preparations differ in strength, but one should aim for a mild or moderate level experience. However, before we move on, there is also henbane, which has the telltale Latin species name of Pocula amatoria. It played an important role in the ointment and potions of witches. In medieval bathhouses, henbane seeds were on the oven, whereupon men and women would collide together. Unquote. Justinian gave the Pocula amatoria, which literally means love potion, equal status to the magical arts in the Lex Cornelia, and their use has been strongly punished since the 13th century and the reign of Emperor Friedrich II. In fact, into the 18th century, Prussian county law still designated severe punishments for using love potions. The German expression Altsitzerkraut, old sitter herb, refers to the use of henbane to get rid of an inactive old person sitting on a bench. It's a German sort of mentality, don't you know? So here once again we find a link between spirituality, psychedelics, shamanism, and eroticism. After that divagation, let us return to the historic Psychedelic Sciences Conference. The theme of connectedness was pervasive at psychedelic science, featuring consistently among speakers' presentations. Of the 17 patients in one research study who endorsed the treatment's effectiveness, all made reference to one particular mediating factor, a renewed sense of connection or connectedness. This raises the question of whether psychedelic therapy targets a core factor underlying mental health. These London researchers believe that it does, and that connectedness is the key. Connectedness, as it was described in patients in this study, encompassed not only connection to others, i.e. social connectedness, and the world in general, e.g. connectedness to nature, but also connection to the self. Post-treatment, participants referred to feeling reconnected to past values, pleasures, and hobbies, as well as feeling more integrated, embodied, and at peace with themselves and their own troubled backgrounds. It is a working hypothesis of this Imperial College group that connection to self is a bedrock from which connection to others and the world can follow most naturally. Another hypothesis is that positive therapeutic outcomes could be jeopardized if the primary connection to self stage is leapfrogged, i.e., due to incomplete psychological integration. It is notable in this regard that many patients in their trial study felt that the process and effect of being prescribed conventional treatments had merely reinforced their sense of disconnection. These researchers were indeed mindful of the scientifically delicate association between psychedelics and so-called mystical experience. Despite previously expressed concerns regarding this construct, psychedelic-induced mystical experiences have been found to predict long-term increases in psychological well-being, as well as clinical improvements after psychedelic therapy. Given the apparent positive mediational value of such experiences, it seems pertinent to better understand where their value lies. And again, these psychologists from Imperial College London suspect that connectedness may be the key. Psychedelics initiate their signature subjective effects via serotonin 2A receptor agonism. Since psychedelics hijack an existing system, it is natural to ask what evolutionary role that system has played throughout our species' development, and whether understanding this may shed light on our understanding of the functioning of brain serotonin more generally. Relevant questions have recently been explored. In brief, these authors have proposed that brain serotonin 2A receptor signaling mediates a state of rapid plasticity that is conducive to major changes, for example, in outlook and/or in behavior, when such change feels necessary, e.g., to aid mental or physical survival. Such a function may be related to humans' unique capacity for adaptability. However, as many of our listeners may have heard or read, there is the following. A major new umbrella review, an overview of existing meta-analyses and systematic reviews, was published on July 20, 2022, in the journal Molecular Psychiatry. It suggests that depression is not likely caused by a chemical imbalance, and calls into question what antidepressant medications do. This is because most antidepressants are selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which were originally said to function by correcting abnormally low serotonin levels. In fact, there is no other accepted pharmacological mechanism by which antidepressants affect the symptoms of depression. Lead author Joanna Moncrief, a professor of psychiatry at University College London and a consultant psychiatrist at Northeast London Foundation Trust, said, "It is always difficult to prove a negative, but I think we can safely say that after a vast amount of research conducted over several decades, there is no convincing evidence that depression is caused by serotonin abnormalities, particularly by lower levels or reduced activities of serotonin." That's a lot to swallow. However, with that having been said, we return to the research report on psychedelics published in the peer-reviewed journal Psychopharmacology. In this report, the authors write a good deal about ego dissolution and about how, as they see it, ego dissolution is one of the benefits, in quotes, of the use of psychedelics in therapy, and of how ego dissolution leads to connectedness in various manifestations. Here, at Explore Ecstatic Sensuality, we take a different point of view. What we propose is not dissolving the ego, but instead to follow Sigmund Freud's suggestion, where once there was id, now ego, there shall be. The id, residing in the unconscious, is inhabited not only with desires, including desires for sex, and what's wrong with that, but also with things we have repressed because we have been unable to deal with them. As we have discussed in several previous episodes, what we repress returns in other forms, often in compulsive behavior. As part of its etiology, in repression of sexual impulses the ego did not understand and had no means or mechanisms to deal with, Jacques Lacan offers us the notion that the return of the repressed, and the repressed are one and the same. This assertion is strictly correlative to the idea that the unconscious is not an internal space or mentality. The Lacanian unconscious is not a depth psychology or irreducibly intrapsychic collection of contents and impulses. It is, by contrast, an external unconscious, which is fashioned out of and made possible by practices of language, by the utilization and arrangement of words, signifiers. It is important to stress that the idea of the signifier here is broader than words alone, because after all, images are signifiers, as are semaphores and instances of sign language, each of which fulfill the function of a signifier. That is to say, each of these examples can be read. They convey meaning for someone, indeed for another, even if what they convey is not always immediately evident. Furthermore, as is the case for all signifiers in Lacan, they are polyvalent. They are able to carry more than one possible meaning simultaneously. How, then, to approach Lacan's idea that the repressed and the return of the repressed are one and the same? By taking seriously for the moment that in speaking I create the possibility of a repressed, or, more accurately, of a potential return of the repressed. I repeat, of a potential return of the repressed. In speaking, we create the possibility of a potential return of the repressed. Everything we say creates the possibility of a potential return of the repressed at some point in the future. And that return will be something of which we are unaware. And as Lacan so pertinently explains to us, the repressed and the return of the repressed are one and the same. Jacques Lacan's notion of the unconscious is not thus psychological, certainly not in any narrow sense of the word, but rather linguistic in its functioning. Or taking his son-in-law Jacques-Alain Miller's lead, we may speak simply of the linguistic structure of psychology. This, then, is one way of understanding Lacan's the unconscious is structured like a language, namely that the unconscious is brought about by, and is hence contingent upon, the production of language, or indeed of signifiers. One supposes that the logical extension of such lines of thought is that humans, among cognizant species, uniquely have an unconscious because humans uniquely have language. We are always creating psychologically burdensome, potentially neurosis-producing misunderstandings, both within ourselves, leading to guilt in some cases, or with others. And what is doing this? Signifiers, and mainly language. Recently, South African neuropsychoanalyst Mark Soames offers a new and fecund explanation of the ego and the id, where they are and what they do. And we quote him, "Two aspects of the body are represented in the brain, and they are represented differently. The most important difference is that the brain regions for the two aspects of the body are associated with different aspects of consciousness. Very broadly speaking, the brainstem mechanisms derived from the autonomic body are associated with affective consciousness, and the cortical mechanisms derived from the sensoromotor body are associated with cognitive consciousness. Moreover, the upper brainstem is intrinsically conscious, whereas the cortex is not. It derives its consciousness from the brainstem. These facts have substantial implications for psychoanalytic metapsychology because the upper brainstem and associated limbic structures performs the function that Freud attributed to the id, while the cortex and associated forebrain structures performs the function he attributed to the ego. That means that the id is the fount of consciousness, and the ego is unconscious in itself." Let us hope that Professor Solms, who may be found on YouTube and also other places online, and others continue on in this research. We here at the Explore Ecstatic Sensuality podcast look forward to following further developments avidly and sharing them with you. However, back to Lacan, words, and love. The following is from his 19th seminar entitled Ou pire, or worse. People speak about love in analysis, that is to say, when they're speaking with their shrinks. All things considered, they don't speak about it any more here, on the couch, than anywhere else, since, after all, this is what love is for. This is not what is most gratifying, but in the end, in mundane terms, people speak about it a great deal. It is even tremendous that people still go on about it, that is to say, love, after all this time, because they might have noticed, after all this time, that it hasn't made it any more successful. It is clear, therefore, that it is by speaking that one makes love.